He's in the very last week of his life. And he's in the city of Bethany, which is just off the southern slope of Mount Zion down from Jerusalem. And it seems to be Jesus' favorite place to go. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived there in Martha's house, Luke 10, 38, 42, and they would often go there. But they're not in that house in John 12. They're in Simon the leper's house. Same town, maybe across the street, maybe down the street, maybe across town. And they are enjoying a feast or a banquet together. And in this case, Simon the leper tells us something has happened in his life, because typically the law said that a leper could not associate with other people. He could not have a banquet at his house. So we know that since there was no doctor on earth that could cure leprosy, this man has met Jesus before. Jesus is the only way he could have been cured of his leprosy, and thus host the banquet. Or maybe that's the purpose of the banquet, is to say thanks to Jesus for giving his life back to him. He had not been able to hug his wife or take his children into his arms, shake someone's hand, all the time that he had been diagnosed as a leper, but now he can have people in his house. Now, when we see this chapter, there are 5 people, and each one of them is going to teach us a lesson. If you wanted to take notes or write a title of this, it would be 5 people attend a banquet. 5 people attend a banquet. And each one of them is going to give us a single lesson that I hope we'll take with us. And maybe if you can't remember all 5, if you're not taking notes, then just pick out one lesson and say that's the one I'm going to focus on. Let's go into the text beginning in verse 1. Jesus 6 days before the Passover. Jesus arrived in Bethany a little earlier than this feast. There are 4 days that pass between verse 1 and verse 2. And that relates to the fact that Jesus is the Passover Lamb of God. Exodus 12 says that before a Jewish family could pick a lamb to sacrifice, they had to put it up in a pen and watch it a few days to make sure that there was no defect in it. And so Jesus has come to the place where he will be offered a few days early, in keeping with that type from Exodus 12, 1 through 3, where Lazarus, which had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. So Lazarus is going to be at this feast, and we'll study him at the end of the lesson. Now verse 2, this is the Tuesday. We know that because in Matthew's account, this is in Matthew 21, and it's in Mark 14, and you can do the chronology through those books easier than John. And this comes out to be the day that we know the most about in Jesus last week. We don't know, he didn't do anything Wednesday except rest in preparation for all that would happen. But Tuesday was a very busy day. That's the day they delivered the Olivet Discourse, and also the day that this happened to him. So let's go into verse 2. If you're taking notes, our first point is Martha. Each one will have a visual representation. If you're a visual learner, I'll give you just a picture, a word picture that represents each person as we go through it. Martha's word picture is a hand, because her lesson is serve God with the personality and talents he gave you. That's our lesson from Martha. Serve God with the personality and talents that God gave you. And the hand represents Martha because she was a servant. Let's read about her in verse 2. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. Now this is in her house. She's in Simon's house. But you may be like Martha. If someone invites you over, maybe there's a church meeting at somebody's house, like a youth devotional or something else, and as soon as you walk in, you go in the kitchen and say, what can I do? Do you need me to put the ice in the glasses? Could I set the table? You need me to put the bread in the oven? What can I do to help? Well, that's the way Martha was. She's in Simon's house, but she's serving others because that's who she is. We learned about that earlier in Luke 10, 38 to 42, where Jesus and the apostles showed up at Martha's house. And back in those days, of course, they didn't have any way of alerting you ahead of time. They didn't have a cell phone. You couldn't text. Jesus had been on a journey preaching, and he just got back to Bethany and showed up at Martha's house, and she's in the kitchen trying to get everything ready for a meal for 13 people. And she's serving, And she gets upset, you remember, with Mary, because Mary was sitting out there with Jesus, listening to him, having a conversation with him, learning from him. And she comes out and said, Master, would you tell my sister to come in here and help me? And Jesus, I see him sort of thinking about that for just a minute. He says, no, she's chosen the better part. I'm not going to take that away from her. And you think about 20 years later, did they live in the same house? Possibly, maybe even probably. You think Mary might have ever said, do you remember that time that Jesus sat here on the couch and he had that Bible lesson? And Martha said, well, I remember him coming, but I didn't hear that lesson. You know, she did choose the better part. But there wasn't anything wrong with what she did. You know, serving others is admirable. Fixing a meal for Jesus and the apostles was a good thing to do, but she had her priorities upside down on that occasion. But in this occasion, she's doing what she ought to be doing, which is serving others. Verse 2, Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. So let's think about this lesson. We'll move on. Everybody has a different personality. In Proverbs 22:6, it says, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. That phrase, the way he should go, the way is the word Derek, like the name, D-E-R-E-C-K is how it's spelled. And it's the same word that's used in in Proverbs 30:18 and 19, where it says the way of a serpent on a rock and the way of an eagle in the air, the way of a man with a maiden. It just means the personality that a child has. So you observe your child and say, well, he's shy, or she's extrovert, or he's very studious, or she's athletic. You observe their characteristics, and then you adjust your goals for them and your training of them to fit what they will respond best to. So what it means is that God gives everybody a personality. That can be adjusted by education and environment, sometimes by circumstances, even health. But generally speaking, the personality that we're born with is going to guide us through life. It needs to have some of the rough edges, maybe smoothed, but we're going to be the person we are as we go through life. Now, if you looked at Martha and Mary here, it seems to me that they are different. They're sisters, but different. Do you have a sister? Do you have a brother? Do you have children? Would you say they're more alike or they're more different? You know, it's amazing how different two children that come out of the same gene pool, live in the same house, have the same experiences, how different they can be. You know, it has to do with the way that, you know, their spirit is, what personality God gave them. And that's the way it is here with Mary and Martha. Martha, if I'm pegging her right, is a type A personality. You know, she's a take hold and get busy. She's not shy. Martha, on the other hand, is more reticent. She's more studious. She's more thoughtful. And you don't find her saying a lot. You find her more, every time you find Mary in the New Testament, this is interesting, she's always at the same place. It's different locations, but it's the same place. She's always at Jesus' feet. Whenever you see Mary, she's at Jesus' feet. Isn't that a wonderful thing to be able to say about somebody? And here Mary is, again, at Jesus' feet where she anoints him. We're going to see in the next verse. Now, what I want us to see, though, before we get there, is that you may have a Martha personality. You may be a type A, aggressive, take control of things, have a voice. Or you might be more laid back. You might be embarrassed to be the center of attention. You know, I read that what we do, preach, is very hard for many people to get up in front of an audience. In fact, it's the one thing people dread more than death, is public speaking. Well, once, certain people are geared toward that, and you can get used to it if you want to do it. But we understand that reticent personality doesn't want the focus, and that's who Mary is. Now, said all that to come here. 1 Corinthians 12:5 says that there are different ministries, but one Lord. What kind of person is the best Christian? A type A, or I don't know if the other one's type B, but that's what we'll call Mary, type B. Which one's a better Christian? Neither one. But either one of those is going to have some strengths to bring to the work of the church. And either one of those is going to have some things they're going to have to work on to be good at in the church. For instance, Martha is good at serving, being active, doing things, probably not good at sitting in a pew for an hour. Some of you are like that. A lot of times men are like that. We like to be doing things with our hands. We like to be, and coming in and sitting down for 2 hours and just focusing the mind and not using the body or the hands very much. That's hard for us. On the other hand, someone like Mary might find that easy to do. The devotional attitude, the thoughtful, studious personality. Well, that's right down her alley to sit in a Bible class. You see? Now, on the other hand, it might be really hard for Mary to be involved in the work of the church, like go door knocking maybe, or to teach a children's Bible class. It might be harder for her to do that. Whereas Martha's like, that's right down my... So which one's better? Neither one. What we have to do is learn what our personality is, what our talents are, and be involved in the things that we are made to do, the things that we're really good at. If you have a very outgoing personality, people like you, well, that means you can be an influential person in soul winning. You can invite people, and they'll listen, they'll come. Other people, not as ready, they're not received quite as well, but they may be really good at building maybe someone whose health is good going, and they build a ramp so they can get in and out of their house better. Well, both of those are ways to serve God. Just learn what you can do and do that, but also do the things that are hard to do when God requires it. It might not be easy to listen to a sermon, but listen to a sermon well. I'm going to focus for the next 30 minutes on this lesson. I'm going to get something out of this. I want to grow spiritually, even if it's not my personality to sit still for 30 minutes. All right, let's move into our second lesson, and that is Mary. And that's the next verse. And then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now John was there, the one who wrote the book, so he smelled that. And I wonder if he might have been, we're getting ahead of ourselves, I wonder if he might have also been a little critical. Because it says Judas in John 12, but Mark 14 says the disciples, so there were others that were critical of her. Mary's visual representation is the hand. Her lesson is serve God with the personality and talents he gave you. Mary is our second attendee at the banquet. And her lesson, her visual representation is the heart. Because she loved. And here's the way we'll word her lesson. Do not be afraid to serve Jesus with extravagance. Do not be afraid to serve Jesus with extravagance. Now here is this bashful personality. When you read Mark's account, Mark 14, 3 through 9, she must have gotten to this banquet later because she comes in and I see her coming into the banquet. There are at least 17 people here. All the apostles are here. Lazarus, Martha, Mary, Simon, at least 17, maybe many more. But she comes in and she finds the one person that she's come to anoint with this oil, with this ointment. Spikenard, very expensive. Judas is going to say it's worth 300 pence or pennies. That doesn't sound like much. You probably have a jar somewhere that's got pennies in it. It wouldn't be what you'd rescue if the house was on fire. Well, that's a different economy, a different time. And Matthew 20, verse 2 says that a man agreed to work all day long for 1 penny. So that's a working man's daily wage is a penny. So 300 of them would be an annual salary for someone. So that whatever your annual salary is, fill that in for the 300 pence and say that's how much this ointment was worth that she poured on his feet. That's a very expensive gift. Now, we ask ourselves, we'll come back to that picture we led up to there, but let's go back a little bit and ask ourselves, why is she doing this? Well, John 12 follows John 11, and what happened in John 11? The resurrection of Lazarus from the dead. Probably about 2 months before, but still recent. Jesus has made his way back to Bethany again. Maybe this is the first time he's been back since that. And who was Lazarus to Mary? Her brother, and Martha's brother. So they went to his funeral. They put the stone in front of his corpse. They walked back to the house crying, weeping. Jesus shows up. They had sent a message to him to hurry up because he who thou lovest is dead, but Jesus delayed for 2 more days, and then he comes, and Lazarus is dead and buried by that time. And both sisters said, if thou hadst been here, he had not died. There's a little accusation in that. Why didn't you get here? And Jesus said, where have you laid him? And they take him out there, and he says, move the stone. And Martha, the practical one, says, he stinks by now. He's been dead 4 days. Jesus said, move the stone. They moved it, and Jesus spoke, Lazarus, come forth. I believe that part of the miracle was that Jesus stood him up because he's wrapped in those grave clothes, and he has to be unwound before he can walk. But anyway, he stood up. He was alive. He'd been dead 4 days. He's alive. Can you imagine Mary hugging her formerly dead brother, walking hand in hand maybe with him back to their house? Can you imagine all the things that just poured out of her that she had wanted to say, that she thought about saying after he was gone, and now she gets to say them? Can you imagine being in that town and going to the grocery store the next week, and you went to Lazarus' funeral last week, and you all go to the grocery store? That looks like Lazarus. I guess. What? I went to your funeral. I'm going to come back to that thought at the end of the lesson. Well, Mary comes in. We come back, a little bit more before we go back. So she got her brother back. And maybe she hears that Jesus is back in town, and she said, oh, I want to give him something. He gave me my brother back. And maybe she walks in her house, perhaps says, oh, I could give him that. No, that's not enough. I could give him that, but that wouldn't look good for a woman to give to a man. I could give him the alabaster box. Now, people in that day lived in a part of the world that was often invaded by armies, and so they kept something they could grab and take with them if they had to run and sell and live on. So sometimes they would bury money out behind the house somewhere, and then they would run and dig it up to go, or sometimes it would be an expensive robe, embroidered robe that they could sell, and they could wear it or carry it. Anyway, this was another thing they did, and it was often handed down from one generation to another. Alabaster box. The interesting thing about this is it was not made to be used. It was hermetically sealed. It didn't have a reusable top. So it had a long neck on it made out of an expensive gemstone. And it was breakable, highly breakable. But if you were careful with it, the ointment that was in there wouldn't evaporate. So when she gets there, she's going to break the neck of it because that's the only way to get it out. Anyway, so she said, I could give him the alabaster box. I said, no, that was grandma's. I can't give him that. Well, we might need that one. And then maybe she's reasoning with herself. What am I ever going to do with this better than giving it to Jesus? He's about to die. Because he told her that. He told everybody that. She believed it. So she digs it out wherever it is, carries it down the street carefully, walks in the room where he is. The banquet's going there, looks around and finds him, walks up behind him. Now remember, in those days they didn't have tables that were this height, 18 inches, and they had cushions all around. And they would prop up on an elbow and eat with one hand, and they would be sort of in a circle or a U-shaped often. And then so your feet would be behind you, and they would take off their shoes. They wore sandals, take off their shoes, so it would be bare feet. So she walks in, and Jesus is evidently at a table, and he's talking to somebody, and she breaks it and pours it on his feet. Now, Mark says that she poured it on his head. And the Bible critic says, see, which one was it? A contradiction is two things that both cannot be true. Could this be the way it happened? She comes in, pours it on his head, steps back, waits for the smile that is going to come, and then she feels like, oh no, there's some more in here. Remember, you can't put a lid on it. So she says, well, okay. And she pours the rest of it on his feet. Yeah, that is likely the way it happened. And then she noticed that his feet were dirty. Normally, the host would provide at least water and a towel to wash your feet, or if they were wealthier, they would provide a servant out there to do that service for you before you came in. Because they walked everywhere, dusty roads, their feet were normally dirty. In this case, that didn't happen. So I see Mary looking around like, oh no, I've made a mess, and it's not her house. She doesn't have a towel. So she does something that a Jewish woman normally would never do. She took her hair down in public. Now that's different in our culture and their culture, but in their culture, when a girl reached maturity, she'd put her hair up, and she would never take it down publicly because that was a sign of an immoral person, an immoral woman. But she took her hair down. And 1 Corinthians 11 says that a woman's hair is given to her for her glory. Isn't it very appropriate that she laid her glory at Jesus' feet? And that she took the dirt from him and took it on herself? There's some symbolism there. But certainly she wiped his feet with her hair, got the mud from his feet on her hair, took it on. What a gift. First, it was expensive, it was sacrificial, and it was honoring to him, especially the removing of the mud from his feet. Now, what was Martha's visual hand? What was Mary's heart? What was Mary's lesson? Do not be afraid to serve Jesus with extravagance. Don't be afraid to be called a fanatic. You're just a religious fanatic. You go to church 4 times a week. What's wrong with you? You gave how much Sunday? You've read the Bible all the way through? You talk about Jesus all the time. What about when it comes into worship, which we'll do here in about a half hour? Worship should be with extravagance. What I mean by that is worship God in spirit and truth. Truth is what we do. Spirit is how we do it. Truth is congregational. Spirit is individual. Just because a person goes into a chicken house doesn't make them a chicken, does it? Just because you go into a store doesn't make you a purchaser. And just because we are in a worship service doesn't mean we're a worshiper, unless we worship. It's a verb. Proskuneo, 61 times in the New Testament. To kiss the hand toward is the primary verb. There are others translated worship, but that's the primary one. That's the one in John 4:24. All right, let me just make this practical. Just something to think about. You know, every lesson ought to have explanation. I want to learn something. Illustration. I want to connect you to the concept. To turn the light on so it makes sense. And then application. Application is how I use it when I leave. And a good lesson has that. It's not just something I want to learn. I do want to learn, but I want something I can be more like Jesus. I can be a better person. I can do more. Anyway, so this is that part of the lesson. What about when we sing, for instance? Sometimes people will sing not at all and just listen. Well, that's not worship. That's listening to other people worship. Right? Now, I know there may be times when I have a laryngitis, or maybe my mom died yesterday. I just am doing well to keep it together. Yeah, I understand. I'm not being hypercritical here, but we didn't sing. And then sometimes we sing so low that because we're afraid somebody else is going to hear us. We ought to be more afraid that God's not going to hear us than that somebody else is going to hear us. And really, you can't sing till you hear yourself, because then you can match your pitch to the others. But if it's so low, I'm really not able to sing as the song is written. What about the Lord's Supper? You know, the denominational world did away with the Lord's Supper in most cases because it's boring. It's passive. People are just sitting there. Oh, how they miss the point. It's the highlight of the worship. It's not what's going on out here, it's what's going on in here. But it's only going on in here if I intend for it to. In other words, where are my thoughts? As soon as this thing's over, we're going to get some. I got this project tomorrow at school. I got to be, where are my thoughts? My thoughts have to be on the body of Jesus. Blood, wounds, corpse. He died for me. He juices the blood dripping from his hand, spears in his side, crown of thorns on his head. I don't want you to answer this at all, and I don't want you to think about anybody else but yourself when I ask it. Those are the two caveats. Do I ever cry during the Lord's Supper? It ought to be that meaningful to me. It ought to be that emotional to me. He died for me. I would have been burning in a fire for eternity without him. But now I get to be with him in heaven forever because he died for me. I was the one on the cross because I was a sinner. He had no sin, but he took my place. It should be emotional. So don't be afraid to serve Jesus with extravagance, loud singing, tears during the Lord's Supper, extravagant giving, you know. We got to move on. Let's think of the next one. This is the only negative one on the list, and that's Judas. So Judas's visual representation is a frown because he's being critical. We'll read about this. There are two verses about Judas, just one about the others. So I guess there's a good lesson to be learned here. But read with me verse 4. Then saith one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? So he's saying to her, to the group, but she gets the point. Well, that was a waste. Man, you could have sold that, put it in our bag, and guess who keeps the bag? Judas. Guess what Judas does with the bag? Pilfers from it. That's the next verse. Not that he cared for the poor. I hope that's never said of me or you. But it was said of Judas, but because he was a thief and took from the bag. Bear what was put therein. So his excuse was, we could have helped the poor with that. But that was a cover story. What he really meant was, I could steal some of that. Here's the lesson. Martha, use your personality and talents to serve God. Mary, do not be afraid to serve Jesus with extravagance. Judas, critics are small people with bad motives. Critics are small people with bad motives. I'm not asking you to do this, but if I ask this morning I'm not asking, for anyone who's ever been unfairly criticized to raise his or her hand, would your hand go up? You know what I know would be true? Every hand in here would go up. We've all been criticized. Now, is there ever a time that criticism is just? Yes? Somebody rolls a piano in here and says, we're going to start singing. No, that's not what the Bible says. We ought to object to that. And there are reasons for that. But generally speaking, critics are small people. Not people that do great. Well, let me just illustrate this with you. the 12 spies in the Old Testament, Numbers 14, 13, 14? Can anybody in here, and you can't answer this, can anybody in here, Ron probably couldn't list this, but I doubt the rest, I could. Give me even one name of the 10 unfaithful spies. Anybody? You're not bad Bible students. Critics aren't long remembered. We're not able to take it. Giants in the land, big walls, we'll have grasshoppers in their side. Can anybody name one of the 2 faithful spies?
Joshua and Caleb.
There it is. Joshua and Caleb. She got them both. We remember people with faith. We don't remember the critics. Do you want to be remembered? Don't be a critic. And often criticism is there to mask bad motives. Small people with bad motives. In this case, his bad motive was he wanted to steal. Sometimes it's jealousy. I'm criticizing you because you're getting credit for something that I really would like to get some accolades for myself, right? So, 1 Corinthians 10:10, murmur not as some murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. 1 Peter 4:9, use hospitality without grudging. There are verses about criticism. And the golden rule fits there, of course, doing to others as you would have them doing to you. So do I want people to criticize? No, I don't. So I ought not criticize others. Let's move on. So his is a friend. Now let's move to number 4 on the list, and that's Jesus. Jesus is in verse 7. Jesus' visual representation is a smile. Because, can you imagine, I picture this, we'll read that in a minute, but let me picture the scene with you first. So Jesus is at the table, feet behind him, talking to somebody in conversation. She comes in, pours it on his head, if we're reading this right first, and then on his feet. And then Jesus is talking away, and all of a sudden he feels, what is, oh, it smells good. What is it? And then he turns around and looks to see where it came from, and he sees Mary. Now, at that point, if you're a visual person, I read that 65% of people are visual, the rest of you don't get it. So, are you a visual person? Now, we're just different learning styles. There's nothing right or wrong about that. If you're a visual person, you picture that? Jesus now is looking back. See that? So, if you can picture that, what face does he have on? Could it be anything but a smile? I mean, it's soothing, it smells good, it's an offering, a gift. I mean, he's like, oh, Mary, what have you done? Wow. So Jesus' visual representation is a smile. But that's not his lesson. Let's keep reading, we'll see his lesson. Then said Jesus, let her alone. I've underlined those 3 words in my Bible. They're meaningful. Let me apply this real quick. Those of you who are elders, previously served as elders here at another congregation, if there anybody is anyone. You ever go home from an elders meeting? Whew. That was a tough one. I got a good friend who's an elder in a church in a state far away from here. When I talked to him after some of those elders' meetings, it's a big church. It keeps him up at night. So you ever take the long way home so you get your head back on before you see your wife and your family? Bible teachers. Preachers. I remember preaching, it's a long time ago now, in a gospel meeting in a state not real far from here. And I preached, I don't remember what lesson, what the whole lesson was about. One point of it was about, and I remember saying, if you're married, you don't have to listen to this. I very rarely say you don't have to listen to a sermon. But if you're single, let me talk to you for just a minute. And I talked to them about marrying a Christian and how important that is to make a good decision. How rare it is to be able to be faithful alone throughout life. Some people do it, and they have my admiration. I don't at all want to discourage, but only encourage them. Stay with what you're doing. But young people, don't take that chance. Anyway, so while in somebody's case, he was married. He came out, his finger out in my face, and said, "Come over here, I'm going to talk to you." Took me down the hall and just, whew. I was just a young preacher, and I was like, man. I had the mercy brake on all the way back to the hotel, and that was when I got there because I was so shaking from that. It probably bothered me. What am I saying? I'm saying, have you ever been criticized? Do you understand what I'm saying? You probably have. Toss and turn, why do they say that? Why are they like that? Why do they do that? Well, here's Jesus saying, remember that time when you were unfairly criticized for being a Christian, for doing what was right? Leave her alone. Leave him alone. Does Jesus still say that? Yeah. Does Jesus know when I'm hurting? Did he hear the words in that elders meeting? Did he see that conversation with the finger in the face? Did he hear that little snide remark somebody said behind the back that didn't stay behind the... Yeah, he knows about all those things. Is he indifferent to them? Well, may I ask you this? Those of you who are parents, if somebody mistreats your child, are you indifferent to that? Doesn't matter. No, you're probably more upset about that than you would be if they said it about you. Or if they did you wrong. How does Jesus feel? We belong to him. Well, here's our example. Leave her alone. I hope that will resonate in your mind. And be remembered the next time you get discouraged by something. So here's the lesson. Jesus is the advocate for his friends. 1 John 2:1. He stood up for her. When Stephen died, Jesus was already back in heaven. But do you remember how the Bible describes him, Acts 7? Standing. Psalm 110:1 says he went back to heaven to sit on the throne. But that verse says he's standing. Why? Seems to indicate he's concerned about what's happening down there to Stephen. He didn't block the rocks from hitting Stephen. He let him be a martyr. But he was aware, and he will reward him for that. So, Jesus is our advocate. He's our friend. I hope that personal aspect of a relationship with him is not lost on any of us. That he does know, he does care, he does love me personally. He knows my name, he knows my situation. He's invested in me. I'm one of his. All right, we move to the last one. We have 4 minutes. And that's in verse 9. Much people, the Jews, therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but also that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. Can you imagine, we talked about going to the grocery store earlier, could you imagine people telling, I saw Lazarus is alive. What? Yeah, Jesus came back to town and raised him. You're kidding me, I don't believe you. No, really. I mean, he's over here at a banquet. Come on, now. And so people are showing up to see Lazarus, the man who had been dead for 4 days. And now he's alive. So here's the lesson. So the visual reminders, you got these yet? I keep going over them. So a hand, Martha. A heart, Mary. A frown, Judas. A smile, Jesus. And now for Lazarus, it's a billboard. What's a billboard? Well, a billboard is a sign that you can see from a long way away. Every time you go by, you notice it. Now, what do you mean by that? What do I mean by that? Can you imagine living in the city of Bethany 10 years later? You have a grandson now that's 3 years old, let's say, and you're walking down the street, and you get down beside him and say, you see that old guy right there? His name is Lazarus. I went to his funeral. But Jesus, there was this man named Jesus, and he came and raised him from the dead, and he's still living. That Jesus was amazing. I wish you could have met him. Billboard. Everywhere he went the rest of his life, that's the guy that Jesus raised from the dead. Now, what does that have to do with us? You go in your grave, you're not going to come out until Jesus returns, right? So there won't be anybody to say, that's the guy who used to be there walking down the street. That's not going to happen to us. But Romans 6:3-4 says that we are buried with Christ. And what happens after that burial? Resurrected. Colossians 3:1-2 says the same thing. So all of us are raised from the dead. What's the lesson? A resurrected person is a billboard for Jesus for life. That's the lesson. So the person that looks back at you in the morning when you put on your makeup, when you comb your hair or shave your face, that person is a representation of the power of Jesus Christ. Are you the same person you were before you were baptized? Oh, no. He said I had 5 minutes, but the clock only says 1 minute. So I'll sum it up. 2 minutes. So just remember to let your light shine everywhere you go, every day. Don't do anything that puts it under a bushel or causes people to think less of Jesus, like bad language, dirty jokes, looking at the wrong things, cheating people, being mean and mad. Just put all those things aside and be a representation for Jesus. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? So here's the last minute. I'll tell you what we studied together. 5 people attend a banquet. Number 1, Martha served Jesus with the talents and personality he gave you. Hand. Number 2, Mary. Do not be afraid to serve Jesus with extravagance. Visual representation in the heart. Judas, a frown. Critics are small people with bad motives. 4, Jesus, smile. Jesus is an advocate for his friends. And then Lazarus, billboard, raised people are a reminder of Jesus the rest of their lives. Thanks for letting me teach, and thanks for being here for class.
Thank you very much.